In a courtroom where justice should reign, one spoiled kid dared to speak, and no one expected what happened next. The room held its breath as his voice cut through the solemn silence, dripping with arrogance and disbelief. Murmurs spread like wildfire, some gasping, others shaking their heads in silent outrage. The judge, poised and immovable, leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, as if measuring just how far this insolence would go. Every whispered comment in the gallery felt amplified, the tension thick enough to choke. The young man's smirk was brazen, a deliberate challenge thrown at the very symbol of law. Lawyers exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene, while spectators fidgeted in their seats, caught between shock and disbelief. The gavel lay like a silent promise on the bench, a reminder that authority had not yet been tested. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last, echoing off the polished walls, as if the building itself held its breath. "You can't be serious," he sneered, voice dripping with entitlement. "This is ridiculous." The judge's silence spoke volumes, an unyielding counterweight to his arrogance. And the courtroom seemed to tremble with the unspoken question, would justice bend, or would it strike? Every eye was fixed, every mind racing, every soul craving the inevitable reckoning. But just as whispers threatened to explode into chaos, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Heads turned, jaws dropped, and the weight of anticipation became almost unbearable. The real shock was not yet revealed. The case itself seemed trivial at first glance, a minor traffic infraction. A simple procedural matter, but in that courtroom it had taken on a weight far beyond its facts. It was no longer just about a ticket or a fine. It had become a battlefield for something much larger. Every whispered comment, every shuffling footstep, carried the tension of wealth clashing with justice. The spoiled young man's arrogance had turned what should have been a routine hearing into a spectacle, a microcosm of entitlement versus accountability, and everyone present felt it. Spectators leaned forward, eyes wide, their murmurs rising and falling like a tide threatening to spill over. Lawyers glanced nervously at one another, unsure whether to let the scene unravel or intervene. The gallery's attention was unanimous, yet split, some rooting silently for order, others thrilled by the chaos of privilege exposed. The young man smirked at the judge, fully aware of the stir he had caused, as if daring the law itself to challenge him. Outside, the whispers of society felt mirrored in the courtroom. This was not just a local matter. It was a reflection of a culture where power often shielded the careless and the entitled. Every person in that room, whether they admitted it or not, understood the stakes. How would justice respond to someone who believed themselves untouchable? How far could arrogance stretch before the moral scales snapped? Everyone in the courtroom knew. What happened next would change the game forever. The camera of imagination pans. Slowly across the stunned faces, an elderly woman clasping her hands to her chest. A young intern, freezing mid-note, a father gripping the bench in disbelief. Each expression tells a story of tension, of hope, of indignation. Conversations lingered on the edge of breaking, the audience debating silently. Should the judge intervene, or let him slide this time? The air was electric, thick with anticipation, and every heartbeat seemed to echo the unspoken question. Could dignity withstand such audacity? And yet, the true measure of this confrontation was not in the whispers or the tension, but in the moments yet to come, the moments that would test not only authority, but the very principles the courtroom represented. The stage was set, the players defined, and the audience hung on every word. Waiting for the inevitable collision, he had never known limits. From the moment he could walk, the world had bent to accommodate him. Silver spoons were not merely tools, they were symbols of a life where wants became commands, and boundaries were invisible lines easily ignored. Nannies and tutors tiptoed around his whims, correcting nothing, tempering nothing, because why would they? In his world, consequences were abstract, punishment a concept reserved for someone else entirely. His parents' wealth was both a shield and a weapon, insulating him from accountability while fostering a sense of invincibility that would one day shock everyone in a courtroom. Arrogance was his default state. Every glance carried the assumption that the world existed to amuse and appease him. Rules were suggestions, laws a distant curiosity. He had perfected the art of charming his way out of trouble, smiling while shaking hands with authority figures who hoped naively that he might learn humility. But beneath the charm lay impatience, entitlement, and a brazen refusal to respect anyone who dared question him. Over the years, the evidence of his temperament had become impossible to ignore. Viral clips circulated online, a temper tantrum over a minor inconvenience at a high-end restaurant, a car ride caught on dashcam where he mocked a traffic officer, a heated exchange at a private school assembly where teachers were reduced to stunned silence. Each moment revealed the same pattern: he was untethered by humility, untouched by empathy, and untrained in restraint. The world watched, half amused, half dismayed. As his arrogance grew unchecked, every interaction hinted at what was to come in that courtroom. He had been caught, challenged, and questioned countless times before, yet always escaped with a wink, a bribe, or an apology that felt more like a shrug. The audience following his story could sense the inevitability creeping toward him, like a storm forming silently over an otherwise calm horizon. The very traits that had allowed him to dominate private spaces, to bend situations in his favor, were the same traits that would now expose him to a reckoning far beyond his control. All the lessons and manners he ignored were about to collide with reality. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every habit of entitlement had been building toward this singular moment. The courtroom, with its austere walls and impartial gavel, was a stage set for his hubris to meet its consequence. For the audience, there was a tense anticipation, a shared thrill at the prospect of seeing arrogance humbled. They leaned in, silently craving the moment when the rich kid would finally encounter a force he could not charm or bribe. A lesson delivered not with indulgence, but with the uncompromising weight of justice. The judge had not been born into privilege. His childhood was modest, marked by hard work, quiet perseverance, and an unwavering belief in fairness. In a small town, where opportunity was scarce, he learned early that the world often favored the loud, the entitled, and the powerful, but that did not deter him. Late nights were spent poring over books under dim lamps, learning not only the letter of the law but its spirit, the principles that could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. Sacrifices were routine, long hours, missed celebrations, and a life often overshadowed by duty. Yet each choice built a foundation of integrity that would one day define his presence in the courtroom. Calm under pressure was not a habit. It was a cornerstone of his identity. No matter the chaos swirling around him, he carried a quiet authority that demanded respect. Colleagues admired him. Lawyers approached him with a mix of reverence and caution, and the public instinctively trusted his judgment. Every decision reflected a moral compass honed through years of ethical dilemmas, personal sacrifices, and a steadfast commitment to justice. He understood the weight of his role. Every gavel strike was more than procedure, it was a declaration of fairness, a statement that no one, regardless of wealth or status, was above the law. Stories of his rulings circulated quietly, often unnoticed by the headlines, yet they built a legacy. There was the case of a single mother fighting for custody against a wealthy family, where he balanced compassion with the law, ensuring the child's best interest prevailed without bowing to influence. There was the civil rights case, where he ruled against institutional power, reaffirming the principle that every citizen, regardless of background, deserved protection. Even the smallest disputes, land disagreements, tenant complaints, received the same meticulous attention, the same unwavering commitment to fairness. Each decision was a thread in the fabric of his reputation, a testament to a life lived in service to justice rather than spectacle. Yet, behind the composed exterior, he carried an understanding of human nature that few could match. He knew arrogance when he saw it, recognized entitlement instantly, and could sense when a challenge to his authority was more about ego than reason. His calmness was not detachment. It was awareness. He had weathered scandals, temper tantrums, and legal theatrics throughout his career, and each encounter reinforced his belief that dignity and restraint were more powerful than any display of force or wealth. Little did anyone know, this judge had seen it all, but today would test him like never before. The spoiled young man before him was not just another defendant. He was a force of unchecked privilege, a storm of arrogance designed to provoke and unsettle. The audience felt it too. They leaned in. Captivated by the unspoken question, could this man, a symbol of patience and integrity, withstand the spectacle, assert authority, and remind everyone that justice was not negotiable? Their admiration was palpable, their rooting instinctive, their anticipation building. They knew they were about to witness more than a courtroom hearing. They were about to witness a masterclass in moral courage, a test of character that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The courtroom had reached a boiling point. The spoiled young man leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face, and let loose a string of mocking remarks aimed directly at the judge. Each word dripped with condescension, punctuated by laughter that echoed against the polished walls. "Are you serious?" he sneered. "Do you even know what you're doing?" His voice carried the arrogance of someone who believed rules applied only to others. It's a sharp contrast to the calm authority sitting before him. The judge did not flinch. His eyes, steady and unwavering, met the young man's gaze with measured firmness. Each response was precise, deliberate, a quiet assertion that order and respect were not negotiable. "The court expects civility," he said, voice calm but resolute. Each syllable like a gavel striking invisible but undeniable authority. The contrast was stark. One figure brimming with entitlement, the other embodying dignity and restraint. The courtroom seemed to shrink around them, every onlooker acutely aware of the imbalance of power, yet captivated by the clash of wills. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Lawyers shifted uneasily in their seats, hands tightening around legal pads. While spectators exchanged anxious glances, some leaning forward, others gripping the edge of their chairs. Sweat beaded on foreheads, eyes darted to the door, and fidgeting hands betrayed the mounting tension. The young man's arrogance was like a spark in dry kindling. The judge's calm, a steady hand trying to contain a fire, threatening to consume the room. Every syllable, every pause, heightened the suspense, building an almost tangible anticipation of the moment when restraint might finally break. The confrontation escalated further as the young man interrupted repeatedly, mocking not just the proceedings, but the institution itself. The judge, maintaining composure, allowed the outburst to unfold just enough to expose the depth of entitlement, yet not so far as to lose control. The audience, caught between outrage and fascination, could feel the story teetering on the edge of chaos. The tension had become unbearable. Each heartbeat synchronized with the courtroom's collective gasp, just when it seemed the courtroom would explode. When whispers threatened to erupt into shouts, when authority and arrogance hung in a delicate balance, someone unexpected entered. The courtroom door swung open with a sudden, almost cinematic authority, and every eye snapped toward it. The man who entered carried a presence that demanded attention. Attention that seemed to ripple across the polished floors and vaulted ceilings. He was the father of the spoiled young man, wealthy, commanding, his expression taut with a mix of irritation, authority, and something darker, disappointment. Cameras, present for the day's high-profile proceedings, immediately clicked and whirred, capturing every detail, the expensive cut of his suit, the firm set of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the room with a predator's precision. Murmurs swelled like an approaching storm, and spectators leaned forward. Sensing that the true reckoning had finally arrived, the young man froze, his smugness faltering for the first time. The smirk that had defined his arrogance faltered as he realized the tide had shifted. All the bravado, all the rehearsed insults and defiance, now faced a force even more imposing than the judge's calm authority. The father did not approach the bench, nor did he address the judge. No, his eyes locked onto his son. Every word, every gesture that followed was aimed directly at correcting what years of indulgence had failed to. "You think you can treat people like this?" the father said, voice steady, ice beneath its surface. The young man tried to laugh, to shrug, but even his own posture betrayed the crumbling confidence. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every lawyer, every spectator, every member of the gallery understood the significance. The son, who had so boldly mocked justice, was now confronted by the one authority he had long assumed would protect him from consequences. Pauses punctuated the father's words, each one deliberate, each one stretching out the suspense. The courtroom, already taut with tension, now vibrated with anticipation. "Do you even hear yourself?" he continued, stepping closer, gaze unwavering. "All this arrogance, all this disrespect, it ends now," young man stammered, searching for a retort, but nothing came. His bravado had been stripped away in an instant by a force he had never reckoned with. The judge, sitting silently, watched the unfolding drama with the composure that had defined his career. His presence remained a steady moral anchor, the embodiment of authority that did not need to speak to assert itself. But now, the symbolic weight of justice was doubled, the father enforcing accountability in private, the judge embodying impartiality in public. The audience felt it viscerally, their emotions oscillating between shock, relief, and almost cinematic satisfaction. "Did he really just say that?" whispered a spectator, their voice barely audible over the collective gasp of the courtroom. The father's words landed like blows, reminders of consequence. Lessons long ignored, an unflinching mirror held up to entitlement. The young man's smirk was gone. It had been replaced by a flash of panic, a desperation that made every observer lean in closer, as though the moment itself were contagious. Social media, imagined in real time, erupted with commentary, hashtags trending. Clips of the confrontation shared and reshared, opinions multiplying with each second. Rich kid finally learns a lesson. Dad shows him what real authority is. Courtroom drama like you've never seen. The imagined feeds of millions buzzed with a cathartic thrill. Every pause, every step of the father, every faltering glance from the son was a study in suspense. The courtroom was no longer a place of mere legal procedure. It had transformed into a stage for poetic justice, the culmination of years of arrogance crashing against the immovable force of accountability. The spectators could almost feel the weight of history pressing down, the electricity in the air, a combination of moral vindication and dramatic spectacle. The young man's arrogance crumbled visibly. His voice, once sharp and cutting, had been reduced to murmurs and stutters. His attempts at defiance were swallowed by the authority of his father and the silent, unwavering gaze of the judge. Every observer, whether in the courtroom or imagining the scene through social media, experienced a surge of validation, a sense that justice, whether public or private, had been served. The father did not need to shout. He did not need to theatrically gesture. Every word, every measured glance, every pause was amplified by the history of entitlement being challenged. By years of indulgence meeting its reckoning, crowd murmurs blended into a hum of awe and relief, the type that signals collective satisfaction. Lawyers leaned back, finally allowing themselves small, incredulous smiles. Spectators whispered to each other, sharing the unspoken joy of witnessing a lesson taught without cruelty, but with undeniable authority. The father's corrective force, the son's collapse, and the judge's quiet affirmation of moral authority combined into a single, cinematic moment that would linger in memory long after the gavel fell. And yet, as the courtroom settled, as the murmurs faded into a tense silence, everyone understood that this was only the beginning. The confrontation had shifted the balance, but the repercussions would ripple far beyond the room, far beyond the cameras, and far beyond the immediate humiliation. The real story, the wider fallout, is yet to unfold. But the fallout outside the courtroom would shock everyone even more. The moment the courtroom doors closed, the ripple effect was instantaneous. Social media feeds erupted, cameras flashing stills of the confrontation that had captivated a nation. Hashtags trended within minutes. Hashtag rich kid reckoning. Hashtag justice served. Hashtag dad knows best. Clips of the spoiled young man's arrogance, juxtaposed with his father's calm authority and the judge's unwavering composure, were shared across platforms, each view adding fuel to the wildfire of public fascination. Every retweet, every share, Every comment carried the collective judgment of a society eager to witness. Accountability in action. Public outrage collided with delight. Comment sections overflowed with debate, some decrying the father's corrective force, others celebrating it as a long overdue lesson in responsibility. Memes proliferated at dizzying speed, capturing the son's faltering smirk, the father's stern glare, and the judge's calm, omnipresent authority. Each iteration distilled the story into moments that were both humorous and instructive, ensuring that the incident would linger in public consciousness far longer than the day's hearing. The young man's online persona, once carefully curated as untouchable and unchallenged, crumbled under the weight of viral scrutiny. Followers mocked, critics pounced, and the carefully constructed image of entitlement became an object of ridicule. Meanwhile, the father's reputation split the public eye. Some condemned his intervention as harsh or dramatic, while many others lauded his decisiveness and ability to teach his son a lesson that the law alone could not. The courtroom spectacle had become a social mirror, reflecting the tensions between wealth, privilege, and accountability in stark, unignorable clarity. Through it all, the judge emerged as the silent hero of the narrative. Videos replayed his calm, measured responses, his ability to allow the truth of character to surface without uttering unnecessary words. He became a symbol of dignity, fairness, and moral authority, an anchor in a world too often swayed by spectacle and wealth. Audiences, especially those who had experienced their own struggles against systemic inequities, found validation in his presence. Here was a figure who reminded them that patience, integrity, and steadfast commitment to justice could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. Emotion settled over the online, of course like a reflective tide. While the memes and debates entertained, they also prompted deeper reflection. Viewers began to ask themselves questions about fairness, accountability, and personal responsibility. The young man's downfall was more than entertainment. It was a lesson. Cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked privilege. Social validation intertwined with moral reflection, creating a shared experience that resonated across generations and communities. Sometimes justice isn't just about law. It's about teaching humanity. That was the quiet, enduring truth that threaded through every clip, every conversation, every trending post. The courtroom had delivered more than a legal outcome. It had delivered a story that affirmed the values of responsibility, integrity, and accountability. In the aftermath, as the public continued to react, debate, and share, the message was unmistakable. Authority matters, consequences matter, and the human lessons behind every legal proceeding are what linger far longer than any sentence. The shockwaves of that day would echo in minds, timelines, and dinner table conversations long after the cameras were gone. In the quiet that followed the storm of confrontation, a deeper truth began to emerge. The arrogance that had once filled the courtroom like a thick, suffocating fog had dissipated, leaving only the clarity of dignity and integrity. The spoiled young man's smirk, his interruptions, his sense of invincibility, these had all been fleeting, ephemeral. What endured unmistakably was the calm authority of the judge, the silent lesson of accountability delivered by a father, and the quiet weight of respect earned through patience and moral courage. The judge, unshaken and composed, became the embodiment of values that the spectacle had only highlighted. His decisions, measured and fair, reminded everyone that true authority is not loud or performative. It is deliberate, consistent, and principled. Integrity, patience, and fairness were not abstract ideals they were living. Breathing forces in that courtroom shaping how justice was seen and felt. Observers, whether in person or through the endless circulation of video clips, found themselves inspired not by the drama alone, but by the example set by someone who refused to compromise his principles. Even when provoked by unrelenting entitlement, the audience, swept up in the emotional arc, began to reflect on their own lives. They considered the moments when pride had blinded them, when entitlement had tempted them to disregard others, when patience and humility might have led to better outcomes. In the judge's composure, they saw a model for navigating conflict. A reminder that calm, consistent virtue holds more power than bravado or intimidation. The courtroom had become more than a site of punishment. It had become a classroom in humanity, where lessons about respect, accountability, and ethical strength were taught with subtlety and weight. As the final murmurs settled and the room exhaled collectively, the emotional crescendo reached its peak. The judge's nod, solemn and steady, resonated like the closing note of a symphony in acknowledgement of justice, done in a quiet charge to the world beyond those walls. It was a visual and moral punctuation, a reminder that integrity outlasts arrogance, that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned, and that the quiet strength of principled action can transform not only individuals but entire communities. In that moment, the audience was left uplifted, reflective, and inspired, carrying with them the enduring truth that character, dignity, and patience are the legacies that truly matter. A spoiled rich kid thought he owned the courtroom, confident that wealth and arrogance could shield him from consequence. But the lesson he learned that day? Priceless. The courtroom, once a stage for entitlement and defiance, had been transformed into a testament of integrity, patience, and moral authority. Justice had not bowed, and dignity had not wavered. The arrogance that once dominated the room had crumbled, leaving only the clarity of principle and the quiet power of accountability. The judge, composed and resolute, had reminded everyone present and everyone watching that authority grounded in fairness always outlasts entitlement. The father's intervention underscored the consequences of unchecked privilege, reinforcing the idea that responsibility cannot be avoided, no matter how insulated one's life may seem. Together, they demonstrated that moral courage and steadfast principles triumph over fleeting bravado. Every glance, every pause, every carefully measured word had spoken louder than any outburst ever could. As the courtroom emptied, spectators slowly rose, whispers of reflection and admiration spreading through the halls. The hero embodying justice and integrity walked out with a measured step, leaving behind not chaos, but a legacy of lessons for all who had witnessed the drama. The symbolism was clear. Entitlement may attempt to dominate, but character endures. If you believe integrity wins, share this story. Subscribe to see more real-life courtroom drama that inspires us all, reminding us that fairness, patience, and courage matter more than privilege ever will. Let this story be a reminder that in a world often swayed by wealth or status, true power lies in restraint, respect, and unwavering moral clarity. Justice may be tested, arrogance may rise, but dignity and principle always prevail.